คุณผู้ชมครับปัญหาเรื่องคอร์รัปชันเป็นเรื่องใหญ่สำหรับสังคมไทยมีความพยายามที่จะแก้ปัญหานี้มายาวนานแล้วนะคะไม่ว่าจะเป็นความร่วมมือขององค์กรภาคธุรกิจหรือว่ามีองค์กรอิสระเพื่อดูแลปัญหาคอร์รัปชันแต่ปัญหาคอร์รัปชันสำหรับไทยก็ยังเป็นเรื่องใหญ่วันนี้ดิฉันมีแขกรับเชิญนะคะ Professor Robert คลิตการ์ดเป็นผู้รู้ด้านต่อต้านคอร์รัปชันค่ะเป็นที่ปรึกษาให้กับองค์กรระดับระหว่างประเทศรัฐบาลและที่ปรึกษากว่า30 ประเทศค่ะ Thank you Professor Thank you for joining me
Pleasure
I remember last time you were here in October last year and you wrote a long article told Thai people not to be hopeless
yes.
on the problem of corruption
Yes I think people are stuck in a circle where you hate it but you have to do it because if you don't do it the policeman takes you away or you don't get your permit or you don't get entrance to the hospital so you're stuck but you don't like it
The problem is collusion between people who hate it, but they think they have to do it.
They're forced to do it, or they think they have to do it, yes. And I think many times they do. If you're a businessman and the only way you get a contract is by paying a bribe, if you don't pay, someone else gets it. So you're in a situation where you may have to pay.
The first step to really tackle corruption, should it come from people, from parties involved in the society, like politicians, business community?
Yes.Well, the principle, if you're stuck in an equilibrium where everybody is stuck, the principle is everybody has to get out at once. So you need citizens groups, business groups to envision a lower bribe equilibrium or, inshallah, no bribe equilibrium, and then think of strategies to get from here to there.
Mm-hmm. But in reality, people may think it's impossible to achieve that.Why do people feel that it's very hard to overcome corruption?
There's a disconnect between our heads and our mouths on this issue. People talk big about, oh, I hate corruption, we should fight it. And the next moment they say, what can I do? It's a way of life. And this is true in many countries. We don't think as hard about fighting corruption as we do about reforming trade or improving health care. We automatically say, nothing you can do about it.And my work in many countries show there actually is a lot you can do about it to make things better.
What should we do?
Well, you need to first realize the problem, and one start is to say it's not a problem of culture or ethics. It's a problem of systems and incentives. So I have a formula for corruption, which is C equals M plus D minus A. Corruption equals monopoly plus discretion.minus accountability. So if you are in California or in Chiang Mai and somebody has monopoly power over a good or service that you want, has discretion to say whether you get it or not and how much you get, and there's no accountability, there's a temptation there for corruption. So what we have to do is reduce monopoly, clarify discretion, and enhance accountability. And if we do that, the systems then are less prone to corruption.Does it mean accountability is the most important factor? Good information flows are crucial, but also the monopoly is important and the discretion. So even if you have lots of accountability, sometimes people can get away with corruption because they have such power and they control you so completely that you have no choice but to pay.
You also wrote a new imaginative story, Future of Thailand in 2018.
Yes.When
people read it, people may feel it's so beautiful but so hard to achieve it. It is so impossible. How can we change mindset of people?
Well, it's a little bit like when you're trying to get your health. If you've been sick and you think, oh, I'll never get well, and somebody tells you what you have to do, but then shows you a real example of someone who had a problem like yours and they got well, and you go, wow, I can do that. And so we have to look at other countries that have had very bad corruption and have been able to improve.And in my books and other things, I've got many examples, 10 examples of countries, ministries, cities that have been able to move, not completely, because every place has corruption, but moving from very bad to much better.
What should Thailand think of it and get serious about it? Because people may think that it's others' business and we are ending up in blaming culture like I don't like corruption, but...
Yes, it's classic. So I think what I would do is think about this opportunity politically of a new government coming in and think if a new government wanted to make some changes, what would it need? One thing it needs is a citizen report card on each agency and city's performance. Not so much about the corruption, but about performance. Secondly, it would need the private sector to help develop that because business is very good at doing that sort of thing. Citizens are good at reporting. So we need something that thinks about governance is a shared enterprise. It's not just for government. It's for all of us to participate. That's what we've been talking about here this morning is how to do that.
But thinking of Thailand, actually, we do not lack of organization to tackle or to be responsible for corruption. Like we have National Commission Against Corruption. We have business community who are very much alert on forming partnership against corruption. What do we need more?
Well, it's a good question, and I haven't studied the details of that, but I'll tell you from other countries. I think you had your first anti-corruption commission here in 1975. And the approach of most anti-corruption commissions is punishment. So we're going to find bad guys and try to get them. And then you have to count on the police investigating, the prosecutors prosecuting, the courts finding them guilty. And if those are corrupted, then no one gets punished. You never get a big fish, so it doesn't work. The second thing we tend to do when we fight corruption is pass a new law or a code of conduct. But actually, most of the countries that are corrupt have very good laws. The problem is the implementation of the laws. And so what's missing is a chance for citizens to inform on what they're experiencing, and business people, not only to inform, but to help diagnose the corrupt systems to make them better. No one will do it in public. They won't raise their hand and say, I, Robert Klitgaard, have just paid a bribe because I'll get in trouble. But if we do it privately and we ask you, so Nata, have you had to pay a bribe today? Did you have to do this? And you can do it privately. How does that corrupt system work in your experience? And do it privately and focus on the systems. Then I find that you can diagnose those systems and start going at systemic improvement rather than just going after a bad guy.
You mean to start from micro system, having access for people to report their individual case of their experience on corruption?
Yes, people can do that. That's very helpful. We see lots of great examples. iPaidAbribe.com in India, lots of good examples. But what I'm talking about is a little bit different. It is how do we get the business community or the lawyers or the accountants who know the scams? They know how it works, but nobody wants to be the one in public to raise their hand. How do we get them in private one-on-one interviews to describe how the system works? And then together with government, then the auditors or the Businessmen's Association, together with the government, looks at the diagnosis and says, how can we improve this system and attack the parallel system that's very corrupt? It sounds like a dream, but it's working very well in many countries.
And along the line of this process, how can we get involved, get politicians to be involved in this procedure?
New politicians are often anti-corruption. If you go around the world and look at elections, it's the one or two or three issue in every country. And I find there are many sincere new mayors, ministers, presidents who are sincere. But when they get to office, nobody helps them. Think about a strategy. How do I assess what's going on? How do I have a strategy? How do I implement it? For example, in implementation, if we're in a corrupt equilibrium, it's very important to do something in the first 6 months that people can see. Improving this, improving that, but people can see it. A big fish goes down, so forth. So everybody goes, wow, maybe this is different. So you don't take the hardest problem first. You may take 2 or 3 that are easier, and then you knock them down, and then you build things up, and people say, wow, okay. For example, Republic of Georgia had traffic police that would stop you and say, so Nata, you were just speeding. You say, no, I wasn't. And they say, pay me a bribe. And the people hated it. So the new government said, that's not our most important problem, but people see it every day. So what we're going to do is fire the entire traffic police. With German help, we're going to hire half the number and pay them twice as much, new uniforms, and the police stations will have glass walls to symbolize transparency. And within 6 months, they had this new group. Within a year, people were thrilled with this progress on this terrible issue that bothered them so much. And they could see the government did something, and then the government said, let's do more. And they said, good.
Did they face any resistance during the beginning of implementation?
You know, they came in on a wave of reform, a little bit like Aquino in the Philippines. He comes in on a campaign platform which said, when there's no corruption, there'll be no poverty. And that's how he won the election. So he had a mandate to do something about it. So what you'll need here is a new government that comes in that may not say corruption, but it may say, we're going to have good service delivery. We're going to help everyone. Easier to do business, help the poor, but we're going to do every government service is going to be very good. And then you invite the private sector and civil society to develop good measures, for report cards, and maybe provide some technical assistance. For example, business knows about IT systems. They know about management training. So have them do what they did in Bangalore, India, help them put together a partnership which then works with government to improve the services, and everybody in a year sees better services, and they say, okay, let's try.
Do you see the Philippines can be a role model for Thailand? Because for us, it must be quite surprising news to see how President Benigno Aquino declare war on corruption. And then he accomplished it.
It did a lot. You know, it's still a long way to go, but if you think about what they accomplished, until the big typhoon, it had the highest growth rate in Asia, including People's Republic of China. Now it was 7.2 after the typhoon. It's estimated that they've had so much additional investment that it accounts for 1.5% of GDP, just an additional investment. And he's politically popular. So you can see there's political benefits. And so if a new president comes in and we show her or him that this is politically good for you, you show the business community this is good business for you. And then if you can show them how to start so they get something accomplished that builds confidence, then they're on the way to change.
How do you see political instability resulted in less efficient measure in tackle against corruption?
Yeah, it's a very big problem here. In the Global Competitiveness Report that comes out every year, people investing in doing business in Thailand were asked what are the most important obstacles. And they have things like taxes, regulation. And the top four were corruption, political instability, bureaucratic inefficiency, and something else about government. So the perception is that this political instability is hurting you a great deal because you have so many other advantages. You know, Thai people are some of the smartest people in the world. You've got great artistic crafts, tourism, computer knowledge. I mean, it's just your potential is vast, but what's holding you back is not macroeconomics anymore. You're doing well there, not even anti-poverty, you're doing pretty well there compared to other countries. But it's this governance question. You know, confidence in politicians, deviation of public funds, all these things, Thailand is among the worst in the world as perceived by outsiders and Thais. So that's the obstacle. It's not just, well, we want to be honest. It's really good business for Thailand.
What is Thailand losing on having so much corruption becoming like cancer in the country?
You know, there's an old study that's the only estimate I've seen. It's old, though. It's from about 15 years ago. And it estimated that Thailand loses over half of its GDP because of corruption. So it's a big number. I don't know if that's still true. That was a long time ago. But the answer is it's not a little bit of money that we're losing. It's a lot of sacrifice that we're giving up.
What should be strategy for people to think of if we can get rid of corruption?
Yeah. So we need, if you're a common citizen, you need a mechanism that helps you report the problems you have where you won't get in trouble. So websites, as well as the surveys. I think the I paid a bribe is very good. For business people and professionals, the accountants, the lawyers, they need a method not only to report, but to diagnose and repair the corrupt system. So we really do need the collective action we saw today by the Institute of Directors, by the government. We see the potential for collaboration here, the NGOs like Transparency International. So you have a chance to work together here and make something very good happen.
But what if the government doesn't really want to fight? They don't have political will to really work against it. They just set up, never put it into action.
That has happened, hasn't it? So let me give you an example. When the Philippines made its change under Aquino, he comes into power and he had there from 2004 some scorecards for government that the private sector helped develop for government in a previous very corrupt administration. He had two laws the previous administration had passed, an anti-red tape act and another act about citizen charters, but they didn't use them. But the law was there. They had NGOs that had developed survey techniques and other techniques to do the report cards and training for government officials from the local universities. That was all there, and the building blocks were there when the political will came. So I think one idea is we prepare ourselves for when political will happens, and we make sure we elect the right people, and we make sure we vote for them who are going to do this. But we have to be ready with a strategy, not just let's have another new law, let's have another code of conduct. That won't do anything.
Professor, you are named top leading expert in corruption, and you are consultant advisor to many governments, more than 30 countries around the world. Do you have formula for each country?
Yeah, there are some principles. You know, every country is different. The political strategy you follow is very different in Philippines, from Thailand, from Indonesia, very different. So some of the principles, though, are the fact that it's an economic crime, not a crime of passion. Right? This isn't something I saw my wife with another man. This is a crime that's carefully calculated. I'm looking at my risks and my rewards if I pay a bribe or if I take a bribe. So we want to change those calculations. So the first principle is get off the morality, get off the new laws, except as those change this calculation. Second point is corruption is something that thrives when there's very bad information. So if we can shine the accountability lights, get people to report, get business people to analyze the systems, get government people to report what they see, we'll get a lot of traction against corruption. That's on the analytical side. And then there's the political reform side. How do you actually do it? And there it's very important to have a few principles. One is do something that's feasible. Don't try to do the hardest, don't have a 10-point program and try to do too much. Try to do 2 or 3 things that are important and feasible so you can get momentum going. Then you have to get people to actually solve the problem themselves. Every country I've worked with, what I do is I bring them data about their own country. I bring them some frameworks like this, and I bring them real examples from other places that we work through just like a business school case. And what happens is they get very excited and their own minds start working and they apply the principles to their case and get very motivated by the fact there are successes. So it's not intractable. They can move ahead and then they come up with answers I never would have had.
Solution for each country has to come from inside each country.
Yeah, the implementation strategy, there are some principles, but it's like if we talked about sports. Are there some common principles to preparing yourself to be a sportsman? Yeah, you should be in condition, you should be trained, you should eat well, but playing badminton, playing football, playing baseball, they're very different sports, so you have to figure out how to train for each sport, but there are still some basic principles. And the same it is with government reform, and our problem with corruption is we don't think about it as any principles. It's all hopeless. We give up too soon. We don't apply the lessons from other places.
Is it because mostly people think it's not my business, because it's the business of politicians, civil society or business community to really fight against corruption, not my business as ordinary citizen?
Yeah, or business people. I can't help it. I have to participate because if I don't, I will lose. You know, I won't get the contract. So there is that element, and it's true. But if we look at the successful cases, we have to overcome that and show people, you know, I understand that you feel helpless. I understand that you're stuck. But look at this example here where they got out of that being stuck through collective action. And they go, wow, really? Okay, that's interesting. How could we do that here? And then they begin to have ideas that are better than I could have.
For the case of big punishment or big case of money stolen, ill-gotten money from the country which is stolen by politicians, what should be procedure to help people or to enable people to feel that politicians are really serious to get those money back to the country?
Well, it's the good news and bad news. The good news is there are lots of companies and law firms and accounting firms who have learned how to track the money that politicians take out. And it's often a lot of money. The bad news is it takes years to get it back, and maybe you get back 1/20th, maybe a 10th. So you should do it because it makes people feel happy that you're going after the money. But don't be too confident of getting a big killing back. If they took $5 billion out, you may get $200 million back.
Professor, you discussed the successful case of India. What have they gained after they fight or initiate those social media of I paid the bribe? .com?
So India is going through a big transformation now. They're not yet successful. They had a big success in Bangalore, India, which is a big province in the south, the high-tech area, where they've big improvement in public services and fighting corruption through public-private business civilian combination. But India is still very corrupt, very poor. And so the people are organizing. I paid a bribe as an example. And people, have you heard about the 0 rupee note? Yeah, you give people, here's my bribe. It's got 0 on it. And now they have a new mayor in Delhi who is an anti-corruption candidate. The elections are coming up. There could be some more anti-corruption movement, but that's not yet a success story.
In Southeast Asia, the number one that we keep looking as the role model is Singapore.
Yes.
Why Singapore is so successful in fighting? Yes, and
well, you know, in my original book called Controlling Corruption, I have a case of Singapore and a case of Hong Kong. And I looked back at what they looked like in 1963. You know, Singapore was very corrupt, very poor. And the principles I described to you, I developed by studying those cases and many others, and they followed those rules. You know, they provided much more accountability about what government officials were earning and doing. For example, they had spies at racetracks and nightclubs. Any car that was purchased went back to government records. If you were a government employee, they had access to your bank accounts. And if they found something fishy, you had to prove you were innocent. They didn't have to prove you were guilty. So it's scary powers. But as a result, within 3 or 4 years, they made so much progress that they could start to pay people a lot of money. So now the ministers of government are paid as much as the CEOs of big corporations. The last time I looked, $700,000 US for a minister of government. Okay? So now they're more money than America per capita. They're growing as fast as China. They've laid the foundation for all that energy. So people say, well, can I learn anything from Singapore? You know,
yes.
They're so far ahead. And I say, well, think about when Singapore was like you. Go back when they were adolescents or young adults. What did they do? And follow what they did then and learn from that. Because they had the same challenges.
How many years that they do to implement those plans?
It didn't take long. I say within 5 years they had big changes. And then it was on the path. But they cleaned up Hong Kong also. Hong Kong within 2 years made a huge difference. They got some big fish. They went after prevention. They used a systems approach. They improved incentives. And suddenly people's behavior just changed because they realized it's a calculation. I shouldn't do that because I will get caught and I will be punished.
So finally, it has to come back to political will and implementation of the law, of the procedure from the government.
Let me tell you a story about political will. That in general, it's good to have political will. But can I tell you a quick story about a case where there wasn't political will, where a president got brought down. The president had a Senate committee that was trying to impeach him. They got some fishy things going on with a road building company, so the senator would get kickbacks. And then he said, okay, I won't prosecute the president. So they did an analysis of the systems within this road building agency, and they found all kinds of fishy things. Then they went to the people's hometowns, and they found all these purchases of apartment buildings and auto dealers, and they got the records. And then they said, what can we do now? They had a free press in this country, and so they publicized it. And that system came tumbling down. The minister, the directors, the president had already left office, so he got away. But they brought down a corrupt, gangster-like system with some senators, some executive branch people. Why? Because they found out how it worked, and they exposed it. So there's room for investigative journalists. There were some of those involved, as well as these civilian action where we look and say, this is bad. How do we diagnose that system, and then how do we bring it down?
Is this case different from Singapore because they are not well known for having investigative media?
Journalists, yeah, I think it is different. You know, Singapore, when they brought it down, they had political will. They had Lee Kuan Yew, and he came in and said, I'm going to change this. This country had a president who was very corrupt, so they couldn't count on that. So they used this sort of civic action to study the systems and then to repeat. I call it subverting corruption, not preventing. But you have an established organized crime-like system, and then you go in and analyze what are its weaknesses. Not how do we strengthen government, but how do we kill this system that's so pernicious.
If Thailand really want to get out of poverty, how do you see the link between poverty and corruption?
Excuse me. There is a link. So when we measure corruption, it's always hard to measure, but luckily there's many different measures that all agree more or less good government. You know, efficient government is the opposite of corrupt government. So if you go for government efficiency and effectiveness, that's a big positive way to think about it. And if you take that and you control for lots of other variables, it predicts anti-poverty success, it predicts democratic success, it predicts economic growth, it even predicts happiness of the people. One study that shows that. So it's clearly an important factor in all those things.
But Thailand is losing if we are not doing something to really tackle corruption.
Yeah, it's a real opportunity for you now. As you change governments, as you have this collective action brewing, people unhappy, transform that into a commitment for better governance, and then start analyzing the systems and how to improve them. Promise you will deliver good services. You don't even have to talk about corruption. How do we get business, government, civil society to take joint responsibility for better governance?
Overall, in the regional level, how do you see corruption problem in ASEAN?
Well, let's see. I think there's been a couple of countries that have made big progress. They're still very bad. I would put Indonesia there. They're still very bad, but they were third from the bottom in 2004. Now they've come a long way. I think Philippines is still very bad, but it's making good progress. China is an interesting case because I don't know China well, but I think the new premier of China realizes that if China is going to go from a mobilizing resources economy to an innovative economy, it's going to have to clean up all this stuff. So they have to figure out how to do that. It's a giant country, so different. Then you have other countries like, of course, Singapore and Hong Kong doing very well. The cases like Burma, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, difficult cases. So I think the Vietnamese have announced that they want to do something about it, but I'm not sure they have really done anything yet. I don't know.
Again, what should Thai think of? We are hopeless in fighting against corruption.
Everybody thinks that. I mean, you go to if you and I were in Mexico right now, they'd say the same thing, or Peru. And what you learn was once they start making progress, then they say, you know, this is like a lot of other problems. We can improve this. Perfection is not our goal. It's improvement. And we will see good fruit in terms of anti-poverty, better business, more happiness.
At least bit by bit.
Yeah.
ขอบคุณค่ะ Thank you for joining. ข้อสังเกตนะคะจากผู้เชี่ยวชาญเรื่องคอร์รัปชันนะคะว่าที่สุดแล้วจะต้องมีความตั้งใจในหลายๆด้านที่จะเดินหน้าการรณรงค์เพื่อที่จะแก้ไขปัญหาคอร์รัปชันและจะต้องไม่สิ้นหวังและทั้งหมดคือตอบโจทย์และที่นี่ไทย PBS สำหรับวันนี้ค่ะดิฉันณัฐฐา โกมลวาทินสวัสดีค่ะ